Hi, it's Susanna here, and we need your help. Susan and I have had so much fun talking to homeschool graduates and homeschool veterans this season. But we've been talking and we realized that we want to hear your answers to this season's interview questions. So we want to turn one episode of this podcast over to you, our wonderful listeners. Click the contribute button in the podcast show notes to see questions and submit your answers to them. Or if there's any question that we ask our guest on this episode or any other episode of this season that you want to answer, you can send your answer to Susan and me at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. Thanks so much for helping us out.
Hi, I'm Susan Wise Bauer, co-author of The Well-Trained Mind.
And I'm Susanna Jarrett, editor at the Well-Trained Mind Press. And we're talking about education for all parents and for all children in all sorts of settings. On this season, we're interviewing homeschool veterans who are sharing their hard-earned wisdom with us and homeschool graduates reflecting on their experiences. And today we have Dr. Melanie Wilson with us. She is a homeschool veteran with 6 children, and she also has her own podcast, the Homeschool Sanity Show. Thanks so much for joining us.
I am just thrilled to be here. I'm excited to talk about all things homeschooling.
Yay! So Melanie, before we dive deep into your homeschool experience, could you maybe share a little bit of an overview of your homeschool, the years you were homeschooling, how many children you homeschooled, and if you homeschooled all the way through, and then kind of maybe transitioning into what you're doing now because you're still very active in the homeschool world?
Yes, absolutely. So I started off as a clinical psychologist working in a Christian practice, and I thought I had the ideal plan, and I was going to work part-time and be home with my baby part-time, but that didn't work out. And then I was really feeling called to homeschool, which I knew very little about. I researched it and I was impressed, but I still didn't want to do it. So I just really ran from that experience until one day I just thought, okay, if I believe that God is calling me to write and speak, which I did, and homeschool too, it's his responsibility to work that out. So I decided to try homeschooling my preschooler, and it was really a disaster, which I think we will get into later. But I ended up finding a way to make it work. And I started off with 3 boys when I began teaching preschool. And then I ended up having 6 children that I homeschooled. All of them were homeschooled all the way through, except for my oldest, who went to a public high school for his last 2 years. So I homeschooled for 25-ish years. And I'm trying to remember like where I was, where my kids were when I started podcasting for a homeschool audience. I was doing a little bit of speaking, not very much, but then I turned a blog post series that I had on homeschool sanity and organization into a book. And then I started writing curriculum, and I have continued that since my youngest graduated from our homeschool last year. So my kids are almost 29 down to 19. I have none who are married and no grandchildren. So that, and then I do speak. We were talking about that before we began recording, that I am speaking at conferences around the country as much as I'm able to. But that's pretty much my life right now.
So, Melanie, can you talk a little bit more about this call to homeschooling? Because we have many Christian homeschoolers who listen to us, but our audience is not exclusively Christian. We're a very inclusive podcast. So can you talk about, just talk about that? Because I know a lot of people start homeschooling because none of the other options are working out. But it sounds like you're talking about something a little different.
Absolutely. It really was an odd experience. Now, before I go into it, I will say that I knew a family member, an in-law, who was homeschooling. I didn't know anything about what she was doing, though. And quite honestly, I thought it was kind of crazy. And then I knew someone who wanted to begin homeschooling, but that was about it. So I knew it was a thing. And so I just had this feeling one day as I was loading groceries into my car that I should consider homeschooling. So I bought a book about it and I read all about it. And I was very impressed that homeschooling results in the highest levels of self-esteem for students as compared to kids who attend a traditional school environment. As a psychologist and as someone who had some bad experiences in a public school setting, I was very impressed by that, but I still didn't want to do it. And so I talked to my husband about it. My husband actually sells library books to primarily public schools. And he happens to be one of the most social people on the planet. And I thought, when I say that I am going to, I'm considering homeschooling, he's going to say, oh no, not going to happen. And instead he said, I think that's a great idea. So I decided that I would go ahead and just try it with a preschooler when it didn't really matter that much, if it didn't work out, then I could just still put my son in school. And just actually practicing it and doing it is what taught me so much about myself. And then, I'm going to jump ahead to the end of the story that I have said that homeschooling ended up being the most fulfilling thing that I have done in my life. And I've done a lot of things that I really, really, truly wanted to do that I was passionate about, but I would trade all of them for the experience of homeschooling my kids.
Do you happen to remember what book it was? I'm just curious.
I do. It was A Field Guide to Homeschooling by Christine Field.
I remember that book. I haven't seen it for a while. Yeah.
Yes.
We'll have to put a link in the show notes to that.
I know, because that one was around for a while, and it was kind of as I recall, you can correct me, Melanie, if I'm wrong, but it wasn't a homeschool your children to save them from the world book at all. It was more of a you can do this, why not sort of. Yeah. And did that strike you where you were?
As I said, I hadn't ever thought about it. I wasn't thinking, I was never thinking, oh, I cannot put my kids in the public school with this kind of culture. And, they're going to be taught all these things that I don't believe. And, that's not God's way and yada, yada. I just wasn't in that place at all. I didn't know anything about it. And so it was more of just like, oh, wow, this is so interesting. And what I told my husband and some friends after I read the book was that, she really makes a great case for it as being a superior form of education in many cases. I just still don't want to do it. I just didn't want to give up what I thought which is what I thought I had to do. I didn't want to give up my career goals. Now, I was not practicing at the time because that ship had already sailed. My child kept getting ear infections, and I just thought, you know what? And until I'm done having kids, I'm not going to go back to practicing. But it was more that I had these professional aspirations, and I just did not see how I could be a full-time home educator and do those other things that I felt called to do.
Right. So I just want to pick at this a little bit more, and you can tell me to bug off and we can go talk about something else. But a lot of times I do actually say to moms who are contemplating homeschooling, and moms in particular, if you're homeschooling because of some kind of outside pressure, don't do it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it, because, and you're a psychologist, so I'm sure you understand, the dangers of someone doing something that's actually against their gut, their core feeling of what they should be doing. But you're kind of describing the opposite. And just, for the sake of our young moms listening, I want you to talk about that a little bit more.
So as I alluded to, I felt very sure that God had called me to be a writer and a speaker. I had done quite a bit of that before I had children, while I had young children. And it was challenging. It's challenging to have a baby and a toddler running around the house while you're talking to an editor in New York about this article that you're writing. And so I just thought, there is just no way that is for me. And then the other piece that I haven't mentioned is I felt pressure after I had spent years of my life getting a PhD, and not just a PhD, but the experience that I needed to be licensed as a psychologist. And when I did ultimately decide to homeschool, I had people in my life who were very important to me say, what a waste. It was very hard for me. So I felt, especially after I got over the rough patch, which I hope we will dive into a little bit more.
Come back to that.
After I got over that, I felt that this was my calling. And I was absolutely right, because it not only was what I believe was best for my children, but it was best for me. I just didn't know it.
Yeah, I guess I'm always on a little bit of a crusade to tell women to listen to their gut instincts. Because we're so often taught to disregard them or to downplay them or to talk ourselves out of them. So, but it sounds like what you're saying, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but it sounds as though you actually were listening to your gut instinct. And it was the other voices that were saying, don't do this.
I mean, I don't talk about maybe my intuition in the same way that you're describing it. I don't ever call it a gut instinct.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. But from a spiritual standpoint, I was listening to what I believed that I needed to do. In other words, no one forced me to homeschool. My husband never was, at me saying, you have to do this. And I do know women who have that experience. There was no reason why we had to do it. There was no financial pressure. We don't live in a bad school district. None of those things. So it was more that I believed this was what I was supposed to do. And I don't really know how to explain it other than that. And so, maybe I'm overplaying the resistance that I felt to it too much. And, that resistance was really born of ignorance, because I didn't know. I didn't know what homeschooling was. I didn't know what my daily life would be like. And so I was reacting to that more so than I know in my heart that I'm not supposed to homeschool. It wasn't that at all.
No, that's really helpful. I remember, and I'm sure those our listeners who've been with us for a while have heard me tell a story about how when my mother pulled us out of school in 1971 to homeschool us, my grandparents cried. It was this, what are you doing? You're going to ruin their whole little lives. And so there is like that, I balancing the outside voice with the inside voice is just such an ongoing challenge, I think. I got us thoroughly sidetracked, but I think it's such an interesting question, Melanie. And, and because you've had training in psychology and, this is something that you do, I just think it's really helpful for moms who are thinking to themselves, do I really want to do this or not? To have some way of sorting out all of those competing voices in their head.
Right. And I mean, I think for me, that's why it was so important to try it instead of just, I'm just going to talk about it, think about it, read about it, ask other people about it. Yeah. Just try it. And that was the most helpful thing that I did was to try it.
Let's talk about trying it, because you said that initially you called it a disaster. So tell us more about that and how you got to do that.
More about that.
I want to hear about the disaster.
Yeah. So I have to preface the disaster with what my expectations of it were. And my expectation was that, hey, homeschooling is so great because I don't have to have a schedule. I can do whatever I want. I can go to bed when I want. I can get up when I want. I can do all these homeschooly things on my own schedule when I feel like it works for me as a mother of 3 young boys. And I mean, that is one issue that I had. And that did not work at all. So at the end of the day, I had done none of these amazing homeschool activities that I had planned. And it wasn't because I had a clean house. I wasn't cleaning the house. I wasn't doing this creative play, wonderful experiential thing that I was hoping to do with my kids. And I had no plan for dinner, and I felt just frazzled, disorganized. And I just thought, okay, if this is how it is, I obviously cannot homeschool. The Division of Family Services is going to come knocking on my door, and they're going to say, oh, no, not you. You are not able to do this. And my husband was very concerned about my ability to do that. But even if he hadn't been, I just knew this is not working. I cannot do it. And then a friend of mine told me about a woman online who is not a homeschooling mom, and her just very simple strategy for managing your home just turned everything around for me. And not only gave me the confidence that I could homeschool, but that I could even add more children to our family and manage that as well.
I've seen some blog posts you've written about this. It seems like learning some habits and some routines really felt important to you. Can you give us a little bit more detail about some of the habits and routines that helped you build, what you now call the Homeschool Sanity Show, and all of these things that have really helped you and that you now hand on to others to stay organized? What were those things that were missing?
Yeah. So the basic thing that I learned from a woman who calls herself Fly Lady, the Fly Lady.
Oh, I love Fly Lady.
That's, yes.
We'll have to link her in the show notes. I've not heard of this.
Yes.
So I
No,
want to
you haven't?
Oh, man.
No, Fly Lady, when we had, I guess less so now, but when I had 4 children under the age of 10 and my house was constantly filthy, Fly Lady she was go-to. Yep.
She's the OG, right?
She is the OG. Actually, I think my mom was a huge Fly Lady fan. So generational handing on of wisdom.
Yes. Well, what Fly Lady said that made such a huge difference for me was what you alluded to, Susanna, which is routines, that I needed to have a routine. Yes, I had freedom. I absolutely did. But if I didn't do some of these tasks that are necessary to have an orderly, well-run household, and I would argue family, that I was going to keep struggling. If I didn't do those on a regular repeating basis and basically do them in the same order every day, at least until I got things together, that it was no wonder that I wasn't ever getting to the homeschooling tasks. So the first thing that she said to do was to shine your sink at night. And literally, you could take that as you have to, get out the sink cleaner and make your sink shine every night. But for me, I knew what it really meant was that before I went to bed, that the dishwasher needed to be loaded and running, and any other dirty pans or things that didn't fit into the dishwasher needed to be washed and at least put on the drying rack. Because if I got up the next morning to a kitchen sink full of filthy dishes, I was going to feel like I was defeated before I even started. And so what I did, because I tend to be a person who overdoes things that I'm excited about, I took Fly Lady's routine and I copied it exactly. Even though she is someone who takes a bath at night and I shower in the morning, I thought maybe there's some kind of magic to the nighttime bath that will get me organized. So I did it and I copied everything that she did. And I'm so glad that I did that, even though the bath got nixed right away. I'm just so glad because she gave me a structure to follow that helped me to identify what my routine needed to look like. There were things that on her list that did not need to be done. There were other things that she didn't have that I needed to add to my list. And once I started going through that routine, especially in the evening, a lot of times we think that in order to get organized, it starts maybe first thing in the morning. You hear so much today about morning routines, and they are important. But what's even more important, in my opinion and experience, is what you do the night before, so that when you get up, you don't feel like you're already stressed out.
You're already behind.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
That was huge for me.
And this is so, and I didn't expect our conversation to go in this direction, but we always let the conversation go where it's going to go. I spend a lot of time saying to people, look, one of the big things with homeschooling is it's not like you've got education over here and your life over here. It's all one of the things you've got to adjust to is it all being one sort of unified sphere. And what I hear you talking about is just getting your daily routine together as a really important educational enterprise.
Absolutely. And of course, what I connected with in doing that was how good it was for my kids to have this sense of predictability and order, not rigidity. I am definitely not someone who is rigid about her routine. I don't think you can have 6 kids, 5 of them boys, and be rigid.
No, you can't be rigid
in your routine. Maybe there are some, but I was not one of those people. But it just gave us a structure that really gave us more freedom. I thought, the freedom of homeschooling. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. But it was really a freedom that was based on that basic structure of organizing our day.
Well, it's so interesting because one of the things I do a workshop called Teach Homeschooling the Real Child, where I'm like, it's not going to look like Instagram. Let's talk about how it actually works. And one of the things I say in that workshop is that kids don't get jazzed on unpredictability because they're powerless and they're just waiting for you to tell them what to do next. And if they never know what the routine is and what the procedure is, and I think this is really important for kids, at what point during the day they're going to be released to be free and do their own thing, they're just going to get sullen and reluctant and drag their feet, because we would all be sullen and reluctant and drag our feet if we never knew when our workday was going to end, what the next thing was going to be, when we would be finished. And I do try to emphasize to parents that even if you enjoy unpredictability, kids don't, because they're already powerless because you're in charge of things. And that sense of powerlessness can really just block them from learning if they don't have something to count on.
Completely agree. So good. And it's a balance.
Yeah.
It's a balance.
Yeah, you can't be rigid about it, as you say. Yes.
Right. I think that word powerless is so interesting because even with my 1-year-old, I noticed that because the most structured part of our day is her bedtime routine. And she gets excited. Like she looks proud of herself because she says the word that's next in the routine. Like if we say bath, she goes bath. And when she's done in the bath, she says baba. And when she's done with her baba, she says teeth. And she's just like, she looks proud of herself that she knows what's coming next in a way. Like it gives her some power. Like she knows what's going on for the for the first time all day, or for the first time since she woke up. So that makes so much sense to me, that as kids grow, it gives them a little bit of power to know what's coming next.
Power is important. I think a lot of times, and of course I grew up very conservative evangelical. And so, I heard many sermons about relinquishing control. And that really sort of obscures how important it is to have the right kind of control, the control that allows you to have a good day. And I think that's very important to give to our kids.
Agreed. Yes.
Yep.
So once you started implementing the principles of Fly Lady,
Susanna, you're so young. I love you.
I am going to look this up. My husband and I call it closing because we both worked at coffee shops when we were young. So like you have the closing shift where you have to set up everything for the morning shift.
Get everything ready.
Turns closing. But anyway, so I want to look her up. But once you started implementing the principles there, how did that impact your homeschool day?
Wow. I mean, it really just freed me up to actually dig in to all these great books and materials that I collected and actually use them. I was so excited. I was so proud of myself. And it also, so it definitely allowed me to start homeschooling and then learn all the lessons I needed to learn about myself in that process. But it also allowed my kids to participate in our routine. So because I was loading and running the dishwasher at night, it was easy to ask my 3-year-old to unload the dishwasher in the morning. He could take those plastic cups out of there and put the plates. I had a lot of plastic dishes in those days for the kids.
If your 3-year-old was unloading them, I would think so. Yes.
Yes, exactly. But then the kids were involved and felt needed and a part of our home and what we were doing. So it really just opened up so many new experiences for us as a family because I wasn't just, fly by night running from one thing to the next, one emergency to the next. So, our homeschooling became more, I would say, just more interesting. I was able to learn what worked for us and what didn't work for us. And one of the things that I was referencing before that I learned about myself is that I had a big problem with impatience. I had all these lessons laid out that we were going to do, and I had these expectations for how my child was going to respond to them, and he didn't respond to them in that way. And did that annoy me? And so I knew, okay, I have to do some work here. This is not the kind of teacher that I want to be. And what is so funny to me now, and Susan, I know you're going to be able to relate to this, is that I hear from so many prospective homeschool moms that they're too disorganized and too impatient to homeschool. And I say, yeah. And so that is what homeschooling was able to help me do, become more organized and to become more patient.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I love the pairing together of homeschooling has incredible freedoms because, and again, our listeners who've been with us for a while will recognize this scenario. I had 4 under 10 at one point, and there were times when I would get up in the morning and we did our routines, we did breakfast, and I was like, nope, we are not doing it today, people. We're having an adventure. And I'd stick everybody in the car and we'd go to the library or we'd go on a field trip. We'd go on an outing. We'd go to one of the nearby farms. And so we had the freedom to do that, but we were able to do that because I had in my mind the structure of, yes, but tomorrow we're going to get back to, and yesterday we did this. So there was an overall structure. And then because of that overall structure, we were able to have freedom within it. And I have always appreciated that about homeschooling.
Yes. And I think that is also related to impatience when you have this idea. And I've talked to other moms who have this same idea that I had when I started, that from 10 to 10:20, we're going to work on math facts. And from 10:20,
that never worked for me.
That never worked.
We live on a farm. So, if I did that, then inevitably an animal was going to be storming through the backyard and we'd have to go catch it. So it wasn't going to happen. Yeah.
Right. And so if you hold your routine loosely, then it can be a really good experience. It can be a security, so to speak, that allows you, as you're saying, to to say, hey, we're going to go do something else. Or I just read a story to you, a historical account to you, and they were talking about falconry. This happened to us one day, and the kids were saying, oh, we want to know more about this. We want to watch a video about it. Okay, so I pull up a video and we just do a deep dive on falconry, and I'm not super stressed that I'm not sticking exactly to the routine because it's not my master. It is a tool that I use in my homeschooling.
Yep, absolutely. Susanna, do you want to get back to your outline now?
We can get back to the outline. I'm just thinking. This conversation is making my brain spin, and I love it. Let's dive a little bit more into your homeschooling. So did you, once you kind of established your routines, your kids were still little, you started kind of the preschool and then moving into the quote unquote traditional school years. Did you hold yourself to any particular style, or did that change over time too?
Yes, it did change over time. I love books. I love reading. My husband's also a very avid reader. And I started off using 5 in a row curriculum, which is a unit study curriculum based on a picture book that you read 5 days in a row. And I really enjoyed that. And so even though I was considering, as my oldest child was going into the elementary years, I considered doing more of just a straight up literature based approach. I found traditional unit studies, and I just thought, with these active boys, I loved the idea of building a castle in the backyard made out of cardboard and having the kids dress up like kings and doing a coronation and all of that kind of very active, fun, memory making kind of homeschooling. And so I chose a unit study approach for many, many years. After some time of doing that, I found that I was really wanting more of a chronological approach to history. So, and that is because this might surprise you. I went all the way through a public school education. I did go to a number of different schools because I moved several times, but I went all the way through my education to a PhD without ever taking a world history course.
That does not surprise me at all.
No?
Sadly.
Really?
No, that is a really common experience.
Okay. Yeah, I never had it. Of course, I'd studied American history numerous times.
Yep.
But I just had such a passion for it. And so I shifted to doing that and then reading historical fiction to go along with doing chronological history. And then I had, of course, the language arts, math curriculum, standalone. I tried to do a little bit more of an unschooling approach in the afternoons. I also learned about the classical approach, and I started doing just more classical memory work in the mornings. But if it's not already obvious to you, I really became an eclectic homeschooler where I just would pick and choose things that I really liked and enjoyed based on my kids' interests and also what I enjoyed. One thing that I discovered is that if I was really excited about something, I could get my kids interested in it too.
Yeah, I'm excited for when I homeschool to go back and learn about things I've forgotten about or that I missed. I've never really learned, this sounds silly, but all the names of the animals. I know the basic ones, but going, maybe I'll have a kid who just loves animals and I'll learn all these crazy animals, or maybe I'll have a kid who loves science in a way I never did when I was a kid and learn more about science. But I think that's such a cool thing that we don't talk about enough, that when you're a homeschool parent, you have so many opportunities to learn alongside your kids, things that either you missed in school or just want to come back to. That seems fun.
Melanie, I'm curious about the unit studies. I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but sure. I guess I love the idea of unit studies, but it's been my observation over many, many years that in unit studies, math kind of gets the short end of the stick. Was that your experience? And do you have mathy kids?
Well, I made sure that I had somewhat mathy kids anyway.
Right.
And that wasn't my experience because the unit study approach that I was using, which was Konos.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Never pretended to be a math curriculum. I mean,
okay, so that wasn't like incorporated into it. No. I remember that about Konos, that you just did a separate math curriculum. Yeah.
Correct. Right. Yes.
Although I do feel like there are a number of unit studies out there now that do say that they incorporate math, and I'm always unimpressed by how it's done. So so that's a useful insight.
Right.
So I have another question, and I saw when I was researching before the podcast on your Instagram a picture of you playing tennis and how you said that you always played tennis while you were teaching. And you started this conversation by saying you're kind of reluctant because you had these career goals and things that you were really passionate about and felt called to do, and homeschooling seemed sort of opposed to those things. And so I guess a question I have, because it's a fear of mine, is how do I not lose myself as a mom, someone who wants to work and who loves what I do, who wants to homeschool? It all seems like so much. And I feel like I've maybe seen moms where I feel like they just kind of lose themselves in their kids. It's such a huge project. How did you manage to continue playing tennis with 6 kids? And did you feel like you were able to maintain not just a hobby, but like your own interests and callings outside of homeschooling?
Absolutely. I love that question, by the way. I just knew that with my personality, that the only way that I could survive with my sanity, homeschooling 6 children, was if I took the time that I needed to meet my own goals and my own needs. So that was number one. And so some things that I did in order to make that happen were I had a niece of mine for a period of time come over one day a week, not for the whole day, but like maybe an afternoon a week. And she would watch all the kids for me. And I would have a jam-packed list of things that I did when she was here. Sometimes I would even go out on a date with my husband because he works out of our home. And so I would say, hey, Amy's going to be here. Let's go. And so I did that. My husband is also someone who, he definitely takes time for himself, always has. He will go out and play tennis himself with his friends. He will go to ball games, with family members or friends. And so it was an understanding that we had early on in our marriage that we were going to have equal time to do the things that really renewed us, energized us for all the things that we were doing in life, whether that was homeschooling or working. And so he was very, very supportive of me working out, because that's another hobby. I also was scrapbooking with friends. I was in a mom's Bible study for many, many years, and I did that. And he would stay with the kids, or we would hire a sitter if he had to be gone too. So I just think that is so important. And one of the things that really bothers me and concerns me is when I talk to homeschool moms who think that it's wrong for them to want to be away from home or to have these other interests apart from their children. And I will say, before I continue with that, I will say I do play tennis with my kids. I scrapbooked with my daughter as well for many years. But even if I hadn't, getting away and indulging those other passions of mine made me a better mother, and it made me a better teacher, and it made me a wonderful role model for my own children. The last thing that I wanted was for my kids to look at my life and say, I'm never going to homeschool. That looks horrible. I'll never have any time for myself. So it was very, very important to me that I model that to my kids. And also, I just had to do it. Now, some women may not feel as strongly about it as I do, but for me, it was just imperative.
I know that one of the things, and Melanie, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. One of the things that made a real difference for us is that my husband and I were pretty programmed about dividing the day so that we knew who was in charge for each portion of the day so that the other person could have the freedom to work out, to go for a walk, to have breakfast or dinner with a friend and not feel like they had to check back in. One of the things you discover when you have small children, and all of you who have small children will appreciate this, is that all of a sudden time becomes this zero-sum game where if one of you is taking time, the other one is giving it. And we found as a homeschooling couple, right? Because I'm not just a homeschooling mom, we were a homeschooling couple, that if we were going to do this, that we needed to know who was parent in charge. And parent in charge was ultimately and responsible, whether it was from 7 to 1 or from 1 to 8. And the other parent then had freedom during that time without guilt to pursue their lives. And that for us made a really huge difference.
Yes. Yes, I do think that is so important. And for my husband and me, it took some negotiating.
It takes some negotiating. No, it doesn't happen easily.
No.
And everybody's work and family life is different, right? Yeah. So if you're the parent who's primarily staying home, so my husband and I both worked, but if you're the parent who's primarily staying home, I think there can be a real reluctance to say, I got to be off duty now. But if you end up just being on duty 24 hours a day, this here is not a good situation. Yeah,
absolutely.
And it creates resentment ultimately, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So important to, just communicate. One issue that I hear about quite often is that a homeschooling mom doesn't want to take time away to spend time with friends, do that hobby or even work out because her husband doesn't.
Right.
And I say, that's
kind of his problem.
Well, it kind of is. I mean, if you want to get him doing those things, I don't know of a better way than modeling it for him by saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do this. You feeling guilty and then just staying home isn't going to move him along.
Right.
That makes sense.
Well, and you do, I'm speaking as someone who my kids are now, my youngest is 24 now, right? So mine are 24 through 35 now. Here's a news flash for you. They're not going to be there for the rest of your lives. And if they were, that wouldn't be helpful or healthy or in any way good. So you have to design a life that assumes that your kids are not always going to be the center of your life.
I agree.
And I do see a lot of, I feel like over control from some homeschooling parents because this is what they're doing. This is what is giving meaning to their life. Educating your children is one of the most important things you will do. It cannot be the thing that gives meaning to your life or else it will get so out of balance. And then you'll end up a really unhappy lady in your 50s. So, or 60s, depending on when you got started. I got started early.
Right. Yes. So good.
Awesome. Well, I wish we had a whole another hour to talk, but we are approaching the end of our hour. So I want to kind of combine two questions in one, which is what is something that you're proud of from your homeschool journey, something you felt went really well, and then something that you would do differently if you could do it all over again?
That's a great one. So I have to tell you, for Mother's Day, I had most of my kids were there. My daughter was not able to come. She was working, but my oldest son, the one who went to high school for his last 2 years, said just spontaneously, wow, homeschooling was really a big W for us.
Aww.
And I know. It meant so much to me. And, it's not that it was a shock. He's always been very positive. I mean, even when he was in a public school, which was so good for him to experience, he has always been positive about it. But that is, I think, the thing that I am proudest of is that my children all have a positive view of homeschooling. And that tells me that I wasn't just so overbearing in any particular area that they despise it.
So you did good, Melanie.
Yes. I mean, I love that. I do love that. So, and I think just the ability to be independent learners, I think that's wonderful. My kids teach me new things all the time today. And I love that. And then let's see, what would I do? I know what I would do differently, and that is not worry.
Oh my goodness. How many times have I said that to people? The fretting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just like, okay, let's just take writing as an example. I'm a writer. And so it was very, very important to me that my kids write well. And my oldest was an advanced student. He was just advanced in all the subjects. And I took a look at something he wrote when he was a 7th grader. And I just was,
I did that too. Yep.
And I just thought, I failed. There's no way to fix this, And then a couple of years later, he has a piece of writing accepted into his high school's magazine and, just an amazing writer. So, I could give example after example, and I know, Susan, you could too, but the worrying really doesn't help anything. And so often I feel like worrying is based on false information too. If I had known, or really, maybe this is something I would have done differently. I would have talked to more veteran homeschoolers than I did. And I would have reached out and said, hey, my 7th grader is just a terrible writer. What do I do? What do I do? And that homeschooler probably would have said, oh gosh, all 7th grade homeschoolers are terrible writers. You might get a few. You might get a few that are good, but don't worry. What are you doing? That's perfect. You're doing just the right thing. So that's probably what I would have done. I was instead looking at the outside of what other homeschoolers were wanting to share, their presentation to the homeschool world of what they were doing and what they were achieving. That wasn't necessarily an accurate depiction of what was going on in their homeschool. And I was comparing myself to that and just worrying and worrying and worrying. And if I could go back, I would not.
I've said any number of times on this podcast that when you make decisions out of fear, and I would define fear as what you think is going to happen in the future, not as what is happening with this kid in front of you right now, it's almost always the wrong decision. And I think that's what I hear you saying.
It is.
Yeah.
All right. So my last question is a question I've asked every guest this season. Before we finish out, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a parent who's just beginning their homeschool journey?
Oh, it's the same piece of advice that I got from a pediatrician I saw. I was nursing my first baby, and it was so painful and awful that my baby was having symptoms that were really based on my body breaking down. I'm trying to not make it gross. But I took this
We've all been there.
I took this baby in and I'm thinking, he's bleeding internally. It's like all these things. And she just said, oh, could I look at you? And she said, oh, this is what's going on. This is how to fix it. And when she left me, she said 2 words that I would share with a beginning homeschooler. And those words were, enjoy him.
Aww.
So enjoy your family. Enjoy homeschooling.
I love that. Thank
Those
you
are
so much.
wonderful last words. Thank you, Melanie. And it's been so lovely to talk to you. We have to have you back on.
It was a joy for me too. Thank you.
And we'll link your podcast, The Homeschool Sanity Show, in the show notes, as well as the curriculum that you write so folks can find you in all the places where you are. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for listening to the Well-Trained Mind podcast. You can find Susan at facebook.com/susan.wise.bauer and Susanna on Instagram at hopintohomeschool. Our engineering and mixing is done by AJ Falari at ajfalari.online. This podcast is produced by Well-Trained Mind Press, and our supervising producer is Chris Bauer. If you enjoyed the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have questions, responses, or ideas for future episodes, email us at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.